Hey there guys, Noah here, welcome back to another Vanguard discussion video. With Springfest practically now officially over, I figured I'd give you guys my 2 cents on the current metagame in all 3 formats in particular. And I want to start by saying that I've had enough experience in all 3 so far within the past couple months, probably a bit longer than that, since pretty much like the beginning of the year. Enough to a point where I feel like a lot of these hits are warranted and they should be like looked at. Of course, this is my opinion, so if I miss something for whatever reason that you think should be hit, let me know in the comment section below because I've got a ton of ideas just from V and Premium alone. So let's go ahead and get started. So for Standard, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but both Shiranui and Luard need to get hit. I think straight up, if they just carbon copy paste what they did in JP, I think it would be enough. Because then suddenly Shiranui's power level and Grade 2 game is non-existent. You know, enough to a point where a lot of other decks currently in the format can actually keep up with it. And by removing Saragon, you force Luard players to have to commit a Soul Blast to get an extra draw off, which is a random draw and not just off the top 2 like how Saragon does. And so you cut the overall consistency down of both of those decks enough to a point where it isn't just ruling over the meta. Now, other hits you could look to do, in case that's not enough, because obviously results in Japan have shown that both Shiranui and Luard are still doing insanely good, even despite the hits. I think for Shiranui, you could opt to also choice restrict Esperidia alongside of Shiranui Oboro, because one of the biggest issues with Shiranui, beyond, you know, what the JP side already did, was the fact that Shiranui, even if you Regalis piece them, enough to a point where they can't actually, you know, dominate anything for the turn. If they see Esperidia, they're guaranteed 5 attacks off at that point. So I think for that reason alone, you should also think to actually choice restrict the 2. And as for Luard, I'm honestly not entirely sure, because I feel like Luard, as it stands, once you get rid of Saragon, is actually somewhat fair and balanced, minus Draxstrider, which in itself is kind of a problem child. But considering you need to actually set up your deck in a way that where you have to run enough ritual units to get it off, I think it's somewhat balanced, but not enough to a point where I feel like, you know, it's actually like it doesn't warrant a hit in some regard outside of Saragon. So if you guys could think of something, let me know in the comment section. I just wouldn't exactly know what to hit. You could maybe hit Painkiller, so that way Luard has less draw, but I think that's like legit the only thing you can realistically do. Maybe even choice restrict the order package in some way, shape, or form between the Regalia order plus, you know, T-Fault and a few other cards that make the order package work the way it does. You could maybe look to hit some of that, but again, I'm not 100% sure. And then the only other deck that I would say between Shiranui and Luard that might want to be kind of suspect tested is Varga. Varga, considering its kill potential, especially given the fact that it can play a very solid early game, on top of having an insanely good divine skill on top of that, I think it's kind of warranted to say that maybe you should also look into hitting Varga in the near future, if it actually, you know, continues to do well. But yeah, that's Standard. V, on the other hand, I wouldn't say that we're in a tier 0 format, because Gurgit is doing well, and it's topping a lot of events. Oh, what the fuck am I kidding? Of course, it's just as bad as Snake Eye and Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, if anyone has played V Premium in the past several months, pretty much since Worlds, they've known how stupid Gurgit is, especially with the Grade 2 fixer. So I think if you really want to hit Gurgit and just Gold Paladin in general enough to a point where it's not too broken, here's what I would personally do. And I'm curious to see if you guys would agree with me on this. So I think if you choice restrict Gurgit, Blonde Ezel, and Grade 2 Promo all alongside each other, I think it would make the format at least somewhat more tolerable. Because then you can't tech in, you know, the superior ride pieces into Ezel, and you can't tech in certain, like, you know, the superior ride engine in general into other Gold Paladin builds, like Spectral Duke, for example. And it makes the format at least somewhat playable. While also at the same time as you do this, you also have to hit the Shadow Paladin superior ride, because if you don't do that, there's going to be a lot of people who jump ship from Gold Paladin to Shadow Paladin, just simply for the fact that Shadow Paladin has been able to do this for a little while, but the issue is that up till recently, they haven't been able to do it consistently. And while there hasn't been a list that actually has topped with it, mostly because Gurgit exists, and why would you play a weaker version of Gurgit at that point? The next best deck will be Luard, by a fucking mile, if you don't hit it. So, one of the primary reasons why this is actually problematic is, assuming you run 10 dead cards, i.e., 4 Blaster Dark, 4 Bendy, and 2 PVD just to make sure you don't damage or draw into it, you essentially have a deck which, when compressed to that extreme, can pretty much kill your opponent by turn 4 guaranteed. In most cases, especially with the crit pressure, and especially if you go first, it is legitimately impossible to stop. You have to hope and pray you hit enough defenses to actually withstand a lot of the bullshit that Luard is capable of doing at that point. And so I think for that reason alone, you should probably look into actually hitting it. I know this isn't going to actually, I say this, but I only say it as someone who's actually tested the deck. And I can tell you straight up for a fact, if you go first and you pop off, Anja's not touching you. Night Rose wishes it could do this kind of shit. And every other deck in the format is going to bend to Luard's knee. So, I think at that point, I know I messed up the analogy, but truth be told, I think you would have to hit both Superior Rights to make the format playable. And then outside of that, I really wouldn't know. Maybe Suspect Hex, Night Rose, and Anja at that point and kind of go from there. But let's be honest for a minute. I think V is on its way out. I've stated it before in past videos where I think V Premium either needs to get new support or just get axed. And so, who knows? We'll see with BCS season right around the corner if they're actually going to keep up with it or not. And then we move on to Premium. And this is where all hell breaks loose, literally. So let's start with Night Rose, because obviously that's best deck in the format, without question. Outside of Shiranui, which I'll get to in a moment. So Night Rose's biggest issue is that they have practically everything they want and then some. They have On-Hit Drive, which accelerates their GB. They have Denial Griffin play in the form of Cannoneer plus Negro Lily. And you have Draw and an amazing finishing kill turn with Bartholomew. So I think if you're going to hit the deck as in terms of its overall power scaling, especially when you look forward towards, the Night Rose Stride deck set that's going to be starting to get its revealed soon, I think at that point, you kind of just have to just outright kill Skull Dragon. And I know that seems a bit harsh, but considering that a lot of Granblue's overall power level and power scaling comes from Skull Dragon in particular, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that you can actually hit the card at this point. Considering that most people run it as a 1 or 2-off, hitting it to a 1-off will not actually hurt the deck enough to a point where it's actually, somewhat fair in comparison to a lot of his other decks. Because keep in mind, all you need is the one Skull Dragon, and as long as you don't damage it, you have multiple ways to search it. And on top of that, you have ways to combo extend with it. You have just a whole bunch of different ways to get it off and make its power enough to a point where it is legitimately unguardable, even with... Because here's the sad part too, right? Even if you somehow get rid of the Skull Dragon, guess what? If they have a way to call it back out from drop, you're screwed anyway. So G-guarding and Denial Griffining it is not going to cut it. And you could do the exact same thing for the Extenders, but it really doesn't change the fact that Skull Dragon is just a nuisance. And so I think for that reason, you kind of just have to get rid of Skull Dragon. That way it brings down the power scaling enough to a point where you don't have to do further hits. So I think after that, we have Neonectar. And Neonectar, honestly, the only thing I would do with Neonectar is choice restricting Katrina and Cyclone. Cyclone in the late game makes it so that way the plant tokens are legitimately unguardable in some cases, especially since they're able to accelerate their GB count thanks to Asha on-hit stride. So I think that's probably the way you go about it. Maybe you do something about the combo extenders, but you just hit Cyclone first and then see where the road takes you from there. So then we move on to Shiranui. And no one's going to like me on this. I'm going to tell you this right now. But fuck Mizukaze. Get rid of that card, ban it. And you might as well hit Hope on Damp 2 and Dark Irregular as well for the same reason. It makes a lot of situations, regardless of how you play into it, practically unplayable, right? Because if Mizukaze goes off on a Rene turn, you need to hit OT, and you have to hope and pray that's enough, right? Because if they hit their own OT, well, you're just shit out of luck at that point, especially when they've got restanders and all of this other bullshit with Dominate. I think at that point, you just need to get rid of Mizukaze, because I think Numatama's at a point where they actually have enough tools in their, toolkit to a point where you kind of don't need Mizukaze to pretty much carry the clan like it has been in recent years. So I think Mizukaze needs to go. It's kind of similar to Jamio Kongo and Crow, where they made it so that way it's just plain outright unguardable in certain situations. Trust me, I've been on the receiving end on both, and actually I've been on the receiving end on all three, and it's just not fun. So get rid of Mizukaze, ban it. And then my last major thing for premium, outside of the main thing that I really want to talk about going into the future, is getting rid of Hope on Damp. I think Hope on Damp is just dumb. I think it's a poorly designed card. The fact that Dark Irregulars in general on a high roll can easily get to 20 soul, no problem. And considering it's pretty much in the same vein as having to deal with Castile back in the day. So I think just get rid of Hope on Damp, and I think that Dark Irregulars is somewhat fair. And now for the more controversial take. I think that given that we've also just been announced the Harry and Night Rose Stride deck sets that are going to start to get revealed in the near future, I think that we need to start talking about the possibility of hitting the Crest Makers in some way, shape, or form. Now, the Crest Makers have made a lot of these decks really good. Like, for example, it helps Luarn in a big way, because then they're actually able to make the power columns on a more festive turn even harder to guard against. While at the same time also being able to send triggers back, which also contributes to their overall game plan. For the other decks, every single one of the other decks actually has an on-hit stride that associates with them, and going into Harry and Night Rose in particular, both of these decks are going to be incredibly overpowered, enough to a point where Shiranui will be made to look like a joke in comparison to both of them. Keep in mind, Harry in particular is going to be the first Crest deck that has Excel attached to it, so imagine all this crazy bullshit with, Excel hell kind of bullshit you can possibly think of, and then multiply it by Cancer. And that is what Harry is going to end up doing to the premium format. And this wouldn't be the first time that Excel hell has been hit to some extent, although I think in this situation it's going to be 10 times worse. Just simply because Harry is going to have legitimately everything going for it, especially if they high roll into the Crest in particular. So I think for that reason, and it's kind of a similar situation with Night Rose as well, because Night Rose's biggest issue is that Night Rose could sit there and kind of just combo off with on-hit stride in the early game, and then immediately punish with Bartholomew to make attacks straight up unguardable in the late game. So I think for those reasons alone, you should look to actually hitting both, every single on-hit stride alongside their Crest Bearer. I think that's the only realistic way to go about it, because also keep in mind of this too, not every single deck is going to get a Crest in Standard. Not every single clan in general will get a Crest in Standard, because there are only a handful of clans that actually get enough support and love to a point where they actually weren't receiving them. So I think in that sense, even at the playing field, by making it so that way you choice restrict their on-hit stride alongside their Crest Maker, so that way it keeps the overall power level, stable, without completely, ruining the entire experience, because then at that point, Crest decks go everywhere, and it's legitimately hard to stop. I know this is worst case scenario in my head, but this is something I could legitimately see happening in the future. So if you guys don't believe that this is going to be 10 times worse than Ripple Hell, trust me, you thought Ripple Hell was bad. You thought MFD Turbo was bad. Wait until Harry gets his Crest, and you will understand immediately the ramifications of it. I think that given how insane the multi-attacking can be in Pale Moon in particular, I think you just need to hit it outright and just get rid of it completely. And that way Luar doesn't have to feel as bad for not having an on-hit stride to, go with it. But yeah, that's my overall takes with all three formats in particular. What I honestly think should be hit in the near future with an upcoming ban list right around the corner, probably, hopefully. God damn, we need a ban list bad. But yeah, let me know in the comment section what you guys think of all of this. Did I miss anything? Let me know. Until next time, this is Noah, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye, everyone.